The Rebel Capitalist Show.
Let's go back to Lacy Hunt's argument there, and I'll just summarize it for the viewers the best I can. He basically believes there's going to be deflation because he doesn't think there's a way currently for the Fed to actually spend money. I think those are his words. And he categorizes, or he defines, money printing as it's kind of a little different than most people define it. And that's where it gets very, not necessarily complex, but it gets convoluted, I think, for the average listener, the average viewer, because these economists throw around the word money printing or the term money printing, and it can mean a variety of different things based on the context that they're using it. And so, as an example, the Fed prints money, but they're printing, or they're creating bank reserves. They aren't necessarily printing dollar bills that just immediately go out into the economy. And the banks, the commercial banks, the retail banks, they're the ones that are really in charge of printing money the way most people think of printing money, creating additional supply, M2, or broad money in the economy. And they do that using those bank reserves as a backstop. Let's say you got a 10% reserve requirement. So those are your reserves, the bank reserves that you can lend against. But we talk about money printing as well. Is it money printing in M2, or is it money printing in base money? And I think Dr. Lacy's point is that right now the Fed only has the ability to print money or bank reserves, and they could print 50 trillion, 100 trillion. It just doesn't matter. And we're still going to experience deflation because those bank reserves just sit at the Fed. And but he had a caveat there with Eric, because Eric really pushed him on this, which I thought was brilliant. He said, if we get to a point where the Federal Reserve Act changes from a standpoint that the Fed can actually spend money into the real economy, like helicopter money, instead of just the government doing it. So now the government spends it into existence, and the Fed, then the primary dealers buy the debt, and then the primary dealers sell the debt to the Fed. And that's how you can increase the money supply and hopefully get that velocity if you get the money to the right individuals in the economy. But currently the Fed can't do it. My argument, I think Eric's argument, was, yeah, but they've ignored every other law. So why on earth are they why would they not ignore this as well? But Dr. Hunt, his proposal was that, hey, they're going to stick to this one because this would be a hard rule to break. So he thought, if they stay within the confines that they're in right now, we're going to have deflation because, to your point, prices are just going to go down. People are going to have less money. They're going to have less credit, and you have a destruction of credit. You have a lower money supply. So you just have the CPI continue to go down. There's not much they can do. He said, but if the Fed starts spending money into the real economy, then he says it's game over. Then he goes directly from deflation, not to inflation, but to hyperinflation. And I thought that was just really fascinating. What are your thoughts? And try to, if I didn't explain it well, go ahead and give it a shot.
No, I mean, I think you explained it pretty well. But the Fed, like you said, they're kind of limited on what they can actually do with their money, or with the printed money, or with the reserves that they produce. I mean, they pretty much are buying things that have already been purchased, right? I mean, they go to those primary dealers who have already purchased the treasuries, and then they purchase it off of those guys.
And it all stays within the financial system.
And
it's transactions from one bank to another, so it doesn't create additional deposits.
I think probably one of the things that because you hear like the Fed is not going to go into negative interest rates. Well, that would be like the next step for them, to try and, get the economy rolling again, or at least get people to take out debt, is to take the interest rates even lower. But since they're already at the lower bound, they really don't have any room to go anywhere with it. And so, one of the biggest arguments that I think is out there is that, if interest rates go negative, and especially if it starts, the negative interest rates, because, really that stays in the financial system, like you were saying, the negative interest rates. It doesn't really come down to like, the people's money themselves. Like, that doesn't land in their bank deposits, and it doesn't go into their mortgages and stuff. Although we did see what was it, Denmark or somebody
Yeah,
who had like negative, you know, they had it for a little bit. They had some negative yielding bonds on their mortgage-backed securities, and in turn was able to provide some negative interest rates to the home buyers. But it was very brief and it was very small. And I think the major argument is that they can't really do it because, you know, the moment that negative interest rates get used to that extent, then people would start pulling cash out of the system because they don't want to see their cash get, you know, taken away through a negative interest deposit, so to speak, on their bank accounts. And you know, the IMF put an argument out there a while back talking about how they were able to deal with this. And you know, it's kind of funny that you're starting to see in the stimulus packages a lot of talk about digital dollars. And I think this is kind of a preliminary to the negative interest rates, is by issuing these digital dollars. Because in that IMF, I don't know if it was a report or a blog or something that they have, but I link it to some of my videos that I put out. But they were talking about how it is that you can give negative or put negative interest rates on people's deposits, and that's by issuing a digital currency. And what you do is you have the e-currency, which is like the digital dollars, and then you have cash in the system. And there's two different types of currency that you have. So when you deposit money at the bank, you're depositing it in e-currency, which will have a negative interest rate. And then that would force people to basically pull all the cash out of the system, which you don't want to have. So what they'll do is they'll devalue cash to the e-currency, so that over time, as you know, if you go to deposit $100 into the bank with cash, you'll only get $98 in e-currency. You see, so this is a way that they'll force people to put their cash back into the system, into the banking system, that'll have a negative interest rate on it. And this is like the IMF's idea on how it is that you can take negative interest rates into banks' deposits. And so I was looking at some of those proposals on the stimulus packages where they were wanting a digital dollar, and they were talking about how great this is for the people, because then you could load up debit cards and you can have like just accounts
they
with
have
these
an
digital
app on their phone, the Fed app,
have an app
or the
on their phone,
Treasury
right?
app.
And they're pushing it as like this great idea for everybody because it's going to make things so much easier. But then once you have things in a digital currency like that, now you have in a situation where the Fed can inject money directly to the people through their phone apps, and then you can limit what they can buy with it. Like say, you know, here you're going to have all this money, but the only place you can spend it at is restaurants, or you can only spend it on certain items. And then if you don't spend it by the end of the month, you'll lose it. So they can create the money velocity and the money deposits and everything else through these digital currencies, and then wipe out the cash holdings that people have by devaluing the dollars, you know, the cash dollars to the currency that's available out there.
Yeah.
And with China already kind of implementing a digital currency within their country and actually using it, it seems to me that it's only a matter of time before the United States does it as well.